Good afternoon, and welcome to the THERACRYF PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll, and I'd now like to hand you over to the board from THERACRYF. Alistair, good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon, thank you. Thanks everybody for sparing the time to join us for the annual results presentation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the small print, as you can imagine, but maybe I thought it might be useful to explain from my perspective, where I see the THERACRYF investment opportunity, and clearly for me the OX1 asset is the key value driver. And OX1 is a target which has relevance in several behavioural disorders, including addiction, which represent huge markets and clear unmet needs. So, firstly, THERACRYF is addressing a big market opportunity with some large players developing and looking for assets, and Hugh's going to talk through that as we go through the presentation. And that's great, but can we compete? And the thing that I found, I guess, most compelling is that our OX1 antagonist clearly has class-leading performance in terms of its selectivity for the target and other important parameters that we'll talk about. So we're addressing a large market where there are big players looking for assets, and we've got what appears to be the best. So that puts us in a very interesting position in my view. But then you start to think about what about the risk of actually getting to that point of monetization? Well, thirdly, our asset is well advanced preclinically. It's highly de-risked already. We're within a year or 18 months of being ready for human trials, and that's a major value inflection point at which we'll begin to get serious third-party interest in the asset. So when you add into all of that, a hugely experienced and trustworthy management team, plus a pipeline of other opportunities as well, plus full funding to reach that stage of clinical readiness, then in my view, THERACRYF is significantly undervalued and likely to be worth several multiples of that value in the not too distant future. So hopefully that conveys very briefly my interest and excitement in both THERACRYF and particularly the OX1 asset. And I'll hand over now to Hugh to take us through the detail of the presentation.
Thanks, Alistair, and I'll reiterate again a very warm welcome on board. It's been an intensive last quarter of the period. It seems like we've been working together for quite a while. It's a very productive and friendly working relationship, and we do welcome very much your input to the company so far, and more to come. So the group pipeline now then is in priority order, not the traditional way of doing it in preclinical to clinical, etc. Priority order being that OX1, the orexin-1 antagonist in substance use disorders, starting with binge eating disorder, is our key priority. And we'll reiterate why we believe that's our key priority. SFX01, the legacy program that many people attending will have heard many times from us, is covered by a grant in the fatal brain cancer glioblastoma through our collaboration with the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And that's going pretty much to plan, with a window of opportunity clinical study happening next year in the first half of 2026. We've in the middle there, we've got an as yet unfunded program, which is equally promising in our eyes, and that's the dopamine, the atypical dopamine reuptake inhibitor, which has got, again, de-risked and compelling preclinical data in 2 models of fatigue and a model of narcolepsy. And we will look to try and fund that exciting program separately over the next period. We have on SFX01 at the bottom there, the Stalicla deal, and I'll address the current questions on that Stalicla deal as we go through. The management and board here, this is for reference, I'm not going to go through, but we've got a century and a half of experience between us, 30 development programs, 35 in-licensing and out-licensing deals and financings. So Alistair being the second newest to the board, we welcome Ed Wardle there representing his investment in the company, a pivotal investment in February from Tricata, now Northern. Ed just joined the board, and we wish him a warm welcome as well. Hugely experienced, board and management to govern and enable the company. The investment case, this is a complex slide, and this will be available on our website very shortly. Why should you invest in THERACRYF? Well, as of now, we've got a diversified portfolio, and the qualifying copy is below that. We've got a high level of focus. We've got significant markets to address with these potentially class-leading profiles that we have. The data so far on these agents, particularly the orexin-1 blocker, is compelling. That is, it is industry leading. The quality of it is industry standard, best pharma standard, and the quanta, the level of the data, relative to potential competitors in the orexin space. The lead programs are highly focused into key inflection points. Alistair mentioned that first inflection point in his introduction, and that is that within a year to 18 months, we're in the huge inflection point of getting ready for clinical trials in man. The so-called IND or IMPD enabling work will be complete by then, and it is funded, of course, as a result of the raise we completed in the first quarter. The leadership team I mentioned on the previous slide, more than enough experience in delivering and supervising the delivery of these programs in these areas of medicine, all of which have a high unmet clinical need. More to dwell on that, please send us questions on it should you wish to learn more. So the CNS opportunity, the central nervous system, mainly psychiatry opportunity. This slide keeps developing because new deals keep happening. So the most recent one, after J&J about a year and a bit ago said we're leading with neuroscience for the first time in many years, they delivered an acquisition based on neuroscience in January of this year. That's the Financial Times quote at the top there. J&J, 14.6 billion acquisition of a neuroscience biotech, late clinical stage, somewhere further on than we are, and it's called Intracellular Therapeutics in the US. So it just shows you the quantum of gain that these companies can make when they get to the right inflection point. Karuna, a little earlier, was bought by BMS for 14 billion. AbbVie paid nearly 9 billion to acquire Cerevel. So these are clinical stage, later clinical stage companies that get snapped up by Big Pharma, who have now refocused on brain disease in particular and psychiatric brain disease as a subgroup of that. Some smaller deals also on that slide that keeps developing. It's now 2 slides, actually. The second of these slides really is specific to the orexin-1 blocker opportunity. Orexin-1 blockers have potential utility in addiction overall. And the addiction market, as Helen, our Chief Business Officer, has quantified, is currently worth about $40 billion across all addictive behaviors. And that's forecast to rise by 2034, so in 9 years, to nearly $68 billion in drug terms. The orexin-1 antagonists, there are 2 we know for sure in clinical development, and 1 maybe. And in the table there, I don't often put failures up, but these are failures in the orexin space and the reasons why. And on the right-hand column there, you'll see how our molecule compares to those. So failure number 1, quite recently, in the last 2 months, AstraZeneca, failed because of a drug-drug interaction. If you pile in drugs that are likely to interact with their particular molecule, then they saw a drug-drug interaction and abandoned the program in a small clinical study. Now, our drug has had no interaction seen in the lab to date, none. There is no potential as yet for interfering with this system in the liver called cytochrome P450 or CYP450. We've seen none with our class-leading molecule. Number 2, inefficacy, was a Swiss company, and we believe that the inefficacy seen in that small phase 2 trial was because the drug does not sit on its receptor for long enough during the 24-hour period. If you don't sit for long enough on this orexin-1 receptor, you don't get the blockage of that receptor that you need to produce a clinical readout. Our occupancy over a 24-hour period is greater than 80%, which is more than enough to target the receptor and to sit there to provide efficacy. And the third failure, some years previously, is for sedation or somnolence. Now, somnolence happens when you're not hitting OX1 specifically enough, and you have things that we call in the trade off-target effects. In this case, the other orexin receptor, called the orexin 2 receptor. If you block OX1, you reduce impulsivity. If you block OX2, you go to sleep or you get sedated. So blocking orexin 1 is what we need, and we have to have no blockade of orexin 2. That particular third failure was because it wasn't blocking orexin 1 high enough compared to orexin 2 blockade. We have the best in the world so far. That is, we are 2,000 times more powerful in blocking orexin 1 than orexin 2. The next best is about 1,000 times, and that's still in clinical development. So we're twice as good as the best of the rest, being specific for the receptor in the brain that we're interested in blocking. And other things that are limiting the drugs that are already out there in this spectrum of addictive behaviors, they need to be effective. The response needs to be durable. It has to be non-abusable. So some of these agents that are used for addictive behaviors are themselves potentially drugs of abuse. There is a no abusable profile for our orexin antagonists, and in fact, all the orexins. They're not abusable drugs in the sense that they do not cause a rush or an abusable behavior. They're non-abusable, so they're going to be non-scheduled in the US or non-controlled in the UK. And if you have a scheduled drug, the constraints upon prescribing are very, very high because of its potential for being sold on the black market. None of that will apply, as far as we can tell today, to any orexin antagonist, and ours specifically, because of its very, very clean, non-abusable profile. Side effects, well, we've dealt with that already. We have extremely limited side effects, the most common being sedation, which is very, very, very unlikely in our case. And also on this busy slide, well, a couple of $100+ million deals done for orexin antagonists historically, and one of those has already actually failed in the clinic. So multi-$100 million potential at these stages of development for doing a deal with Big Pharma, who are still very keen on this space. So now then to the operational highlights, and then I'll turn over to Tony for some of the financial details. So we raised just over 5 million gross in total during the period. Most recently, the largest chunk of that, 4.25 million gross, in February of this year. Management and board participated in a substantial way, and Turner Pope were appointed joint broker. Turner Pope brought in that 4.25 gross number. Our cash runway then, in the small raise we did in April 2024, we extended our cash runway until the end of this calendar year. And now we've extended our cash runway further to the end of the next calendar year. But on top of that, we're doing things with the capital. That's the whole point of being a biotech. So we've extended our cash runway, and we are taking our orexin 1 antagonist or blocker to clinic readiness, which is a massive milestone. So to get that orexin 1 blocker, we had to acquire a company, and that was Kronos Therapeutics. We acquired them right at the start of the period, integrated them during the period, and now we have those orexin 1 blocker and DAT inhibitor in the portfolio. We are, obviously, our whole business is based on protecting our assets. We received in December a PCT patent that covers Greater Europe as far as places like Moldova and the UK, of course, and that patent was granted in December, which gives us protection until 2038. There's already a granted patent in the United States, and that gives us protection until 2039. So very near global coverage. There's only 2 major territories left to drop, and we expect those in the coming period as patent grants. We've refocused during this period as well, prioritizing brain disorders and focusing on the higher value class-leading asset, starting with orexin. We've already dwelt on the size of the potential market for this class of drugs. We welcomed Alistair during the period, and Alistair made a huge difference during that February period of raising money. We still have SFX01 for those of you who've been in the company for a long time. We published our volunteer study, which was conducted in 2023. We published it in a peer-reviewed journal, which are important to put the knowledge out there. It's called Advances in Therapy. And that's the most comprehensive evaluation of how SFX01 or any sulforaphane delivering product delivers sulforaphane and its metabolites into the body yet done anywhere. We're still on track in Rotterdam for our grant funded. Remind you, the total grant goes directly to the Erasmus for 1.1 million euros, and we're on track for the lab work, followed by early in 2026, the clinical work where we'll be administering the drug to patients with this devastating brain cancer. So we have a dispute that's been public knowledge for some time with our partner Stalicla. We outlicensed in 2022, right at the end, the rights for autism spectrum disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders to a private Swiss company called Stalicla. We completed our phase 1, issued a notice of dispute to them, and I have to say, discussions as recent as a few days ago are proceeding very amicably. We're hopeful for a resolution during this coming period of this dispute because it's been hanging around for some time. So we're working very hard and very collegiately with Stalicla board to get past this little hiccup. It still remains a priority product for them. We've seen them raising money or trying to raise money. That's ongoing for our partner. And alongside that, we will hopefully manage to resolve the dispute that's out there. So, Tony, I've done enough talking for now. Why don't you chat us through the numbers?
Sure. Thank you, Hugh. And good afternoon also from my side. So as you see, we had a very, very busy year. So Alistair and Hugh have elaborated all the activities that we've done. So how does that look in our financials? So we did 2 fundraisers, one in the beginning of the year, a smaller one, and then in February of this year, we did the larger raise, which is one of only 8 raises at AIM as of this year, and our raise was the 4th biggest of those 8. Our post-tax loss, 1.9 million, so 40% reduction compared to prior year. So we spent 40% less in the operations here. Also, in the cash outflow from the operations in terms of cash flow, we have 2.4 million, which is about 20% reduction. So very, very tight cash control, very tight cash management, including voluntary salary reductions of management and the board, etc. We closed the year with a cash balance of 4.1 million, so twice as much as the previous period as a result of the successful February raise. And how does that stack up against our peers? So RX Securities produces a report every month. This is from last month. So 110 biotechs that are listed in Europe list and then publish their cash runway. We are number 19, so top 17% in terms of the length of the cash runway, as you elaborated. So we have currently cash runway until the end of calendar year 2026. And this puts us in a very, very strong position to continue the positive momentum and advancing the Orexin-1 program as lead of the company.
Thanks, Tony. Very clear. And tight cash management was the real benchmark for us in the last part of the year. Post-raise, it's now maintaining close eye on the cash, but also developing an accretive program in the Orexin-1 antagonist. So, post-period, we appointed Pharmaron UK as our preclinical development partner to get us through all the complex amount of work that needs to be done in getting the Orexin-1 blocker from proof of concept and short-term toxicology through to scaling up manufacture to kilograms rather than grams, to do toxicology experiments with that material in 2 species, which is the regulatory requirement, to produce enough kilogram material under a thing called GMP, good manufacturing practice, to give to man. And so we'll have clinical supply as part of this exercise with Pharmaron as well by the end of next year, before then, in fact. So we've got a single major CDMO, CRO, or manufacturing and research partner in Pharmaron. The work has started. The work is proceeding. We've got our own management team and a group of consultants in each of the specialized areas working with Pharmaron now. The program has started and is proceeding so far very well, on target, slightly ahead of where we expect to be, given the slight delay in the money arriving at the start of the year. So we've got the experts in place overseeing Pharmaron, and the whole thing is rolling. So that pretty much covers the technical parts of the post period, and the human part we mentioned earlier. Ed Wardle, welcome to the board as a non-executive director nominated by our now largest investor, Northern Standard. So the outlook then. We've refocused all our human and financial resources, other than those that are involved in the grant funding GBM program in Rotterdam are focused on the OX1 program. We're absolutely, totally focused now on delivering clinic readiness for this potentially class-leading drug. It's got a class-leading profile now, and we expect that to continue through this last period of preclinical development. So manufacturing capacity is secured. We know how many kilograms we're making. The evaluation is underway and proceeding well. We have to develop analytical methods over the next period. That is to find ways to measure it in various tissues, various fluids. That's underway. And that has to be done to a high quality standard, of course, eventually to man. Manufacturing efficiency. So we're looking at how to make this the fastest, cheapest way possible, because eventually the cost of goods, the cost of making the tablet, and therefore the gross profit available to that drug matters. We're starting that now to get the manufacturing process as efficient as possible at the kilogram quantity stage. We're getting ready for the tox studies. They will be conducted at the end of this year and then into next year. So kilograms needed for 2 species tox, and we're scoping out the methods required to do that now. We'll also, in parallel with all this, be writing the documentation that the regulatory authorities require, and that is all of this written up to a regulatory standard to ask for permission to put this agent into man in a volunteer clinical trial. We're maintaining SFX01. As we said, we expect regulatory approval to put it into GBM patients early next year, and the patients dosed later on next year under the grant. So where are we? Well, we've refocused the business, we've refinanced the business, and quite honestly, we feel pretty renewed and excited about the prospects for the business having done this 3-step refocus. So that concludes the formal bit of the presentation for today. I thank my colleagues here for their contributions, not just to this presentation, but to everything we've done together over the last few months. Lily, over to you.
Alistair, Hugh, Tony, thank you very much for your presentation this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just while the company take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you that recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via our investor dashboard. As you can see, we have received a number of questions throughout today's presentation, and Hugh, could I please ask you to read out the questions and give responses where appropriate to do so, and I'll pick up from you at the end.
Thanks, Lily. Will do. The first pre-submitted question, how long before you have a product to sell, and will the company go bankrupt due to lack of liquidity in the next 18 months? So this is an opportunity, I think, to remind everybody what our business model is. We will not be selling a product into the drug market. That's the job for big pharma and big biotech. Our business model is to get our assets to a compelling data set point. That is, the data set that we've developed so far on our orexin blocker, to make it compelling and clinic ready so that we are ready to do one of two things. The courtship with pharma is a long one. So we're talking at the moment to a number of companies. We're going to the Bio conference in Boston this month. We are always engaging with pharma with a view to eventually doing a deal. So the eventual fate of these assets is to develop them well to a compelling data set and then license them on for the large scale studies and commercialization, launch, pricing, and marketing. So we're not going to have a product to sell. Will the company go bankrupt to a lack of liquidity in the next 18 months? Well, of course, if a deal happens, that comes with cash with the deal. Alternatively, we have an option to do the phase 1 clinical study ourselves, subject to the market conditions at the time. So it will either be do it yourself or do it via a collaboration deal, which will fund the company. The second question we've got is, why have you refocused around the orexin-1 addiction program? Maybe I can bring Alistair in a bit again here to reiterate why this refocus is so important.
Yeah, no, happily, and I guess we've been through that in the presentation, but it's worth reiterating. So, I mean, this is a huge opportunity in terms of market clinical need. There are clear unmet needs in a range of different behavioural brain disorders, and we've talked about addiction. Particularly binge eating disorder is a sensible one, a smaller indication for us to focus on initially, but it's much broader than that, as Hugh described. So there's a significant unmet clinical need. We have a class-leading asset, so it makes absolute sense for us to focus our resources on taking a class-leading asset to the point of monetization, which Hugh's just described is either an early licensing deal with early clinical data, or take that into our late stage preclinical data, or take that into the clinic ourselves and generate clinical data, which can only increase the value of that asset. So it makes absolute sense to focus on the OX1 asset right now, because it's the biggest possible value driver for shareholders.
Thanks, Alistair. Hopefully that answers your question. So the next one is, why did you raise money at such a steep discount, diluting existing shareholders? It's a very rare, very sensible question for an existing shareholder, of course. And of course, the answer is the market decides on the discount. The cornerstone investor decide on the discount, not us. We have to accept those discounts, of course, if we are to proceed with the business. So the discount was steep. We're not shying away from that. But biotech drug development is a long-term game. We're very confident in getting accretion and increased value for the company as a result of the gains we're going to make in these research programs. So whilst the discount short-term was steep, I think we will see a return to a fair value for this company. And a fair value for this company means a very substantial accretion for everybody. Okay, what happens, next question, when orexin-1 is clinic ready? I think we may have covered that, but when it's clinic ready, there are two decisions. Do we do an early partnering, depending on the finances at that point, or do we do the phase 1 study ourselves? Our internal benchmarks say if you develop clinical data yourself, the size of the prize, of course, gets greater and greater. So there are decisions to make sometime in the next year as to whether strategically we go one way or the other. The task now is to get this asset clinic ready as expeditiously, as quickly and efficiently as possible. So the next question, is there still a market for binge eating disorder now that GLP-1, the Ozempics and Mounjaros, are so dominant? Well, that's a very good question. There is some data on the GLP-1 agonists in binge eating disorder. It's sketchy, it's early. There is absolutely no reason that orexin-1 can't be used in addition to a GLP-1. They hit completely different targets in the brain and the gut. The orexin-1 profile is likely to be cleaner than the GLP-1 profile. If you read about the profile of these drugs, they produce nausea, huge gut changes, constipation or diarrhea, or both. They produce headache. So they're not entirely clean. So there's no reason why we can't use an orexin-1 antagonist on top, either to create better efficacy or to keep the doses below the side effect threshold for the GLP-1s, and therefore produce a synergistic effect with less propensity for side effects. So that's an exciting potential area for us, and there's room for both of these interventions hitting different parts of the body to produce a good effect in these impulsive behaviors. What's happening with Stalicla? Again, may have been covered in the presentation, but let's reiterate that we're talking very productively and amicably with Stalicla board. The CEO and I are in relatively frequent communication. We have a plan to try and get a resolution of the thing. They're raising money, and I think that's part of the dynamic that has to fit into all of this. But we hope to have a resolution in this coming reporting period. So the next one is about remuneration. How is your remuneration aligned with shareholders? Well, everybody on this call is a shareholder. We've put our own money in my case, 6 figures in total. Our remuneration is aligned with shareholders. We voluntarily took substantial salary cuts in the last reporting period in order to extend the cash runway and align our interest with developing drugs and shareholder accretion. We voluntarily, even though it's contractually allowed, voluntarily took a share-based payment instead of cash bonuses to keep the cash in the business. That again aligns us with shareholders because we receive bonuses in shares, not cash. We also have a new long-term incentive plan that was voted through in March, and that long-term incentive plan only vests if the share price increases and we get clinic readiness for the orexin-1 antagonist. That is, if the orexin-1 blocker gets it to clinic readiness and we get several stages, several multiples of increase in share price, then the share option system allows us to vest those options, but only if we get those two things. Okay, that's the alignment piece. A question here: which are the other major countries where you expect to receive patents shortly? There's one in North America, Canada, and there's South Korea. Those are the last two to drop. We're waiting to receive notice of grants there. If you look at the patent landscape, you can Google it. Those are the only two remaining major territories to complete the patent portfolio for the orexin-1 antagonist. If Stalicla failed to take the SFX01 forward, do we have contingency plans in place given the ASD epidemic in the United States and considerable share price increase in Nasdaq company that's recently happened? Well, Stalicla are the experts in autism. We are not experts in autism. We're experts in addiction, central nervous system disease. We're not experts in autism. And of course, the Stalicla platform, the DEPI platform, is necessary in order to separate those people with autism who are likely to respond to SFX01 and those people with autism who are not likely to respond to SFX01. So our key focus for the autism, and we accept what you say, so that there is a huge market developing there, is to back Stalicla, back our own discussions with Stalicla, given that they're going so amicably, to let them, with their speciality and their specialism, do this for us. Should it come back to us, we might look for another partner, but that's a very unlikely scenario. The likely scenario is resolving the dispute and getting on with the job in this very, very large market and significant source of morbidity for the people with autism. How easy is it to manufacture the orexin-1 inhibitor? Well, it's a multi-step process, and we've made it in gram quantities. We're very confident in making it in kilogram quantities. So the job is not to resolve the difficulty of making it, it's to make it more cheaply and quickly. So it's not difficult to manufacture. It's a number of steps, slightly more steps than the pharmaceutical norm, and we're trying to reduce the number of steps with Pharmaron, doing their expert chemists doing that. So reduce the number of steps and make it cheaper to make, so that we get a pharmaceutical margin eventually for that agent. So not difficult to manufacture, lengthy but not difficult, trying to get it faster and cheaper. So next, and so far the last question for now. With patents now secured in both Europe and the US for orexin-1, what's the company strategy for IP expansion into other key markets, Asia Pac, Latin America? We're covering all those markets. We are targeting, as we said, South Korea is one of the last to land in Asia. We're looking at Latin America too, and we have some coverage already there. So we're looking for global coverage for a number of reasons. Firstly, in order to partner this drug with Big Pharma expect global coverage of your patent family, and they expect it to be robust and long-lasting. So 2038, 2039 is very much industry standard for a stage of development that we're at, and we will cover the vast majority of the world with that IP family.
Alistair, Hugh, Tony, thank you for answering all those questions you can from investors. And of course, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. Just before redirecting investors to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to the company, Hugh, could I please just ask you for a few closing comments?
Well, just to thank everybody for listening and attending this webinar. Our shareholders are extremely important to us. That's the reason we're here. We're here for the patient and the shareholder, and that positive combination. We have extensively refocused after a period of austerity. We've refinanced with a purpose, and that is to develop a very high value asset to a next major inflection point in drug development. We're renewed energy with that after a period of austerity, and we're looking forward to producing news flow for you on the progress of that program as often as possible during the next period. Thanks again for watching and listening.
Alistair, Hugh, Tony, thank you for updating investors today. Can I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of THERACRYF PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good afternoon to you all.